Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name is, of course, Csaw or Chris, and today we're talking about ArcheAge Unchained in 2019. How's it going, everyone? Hopefully you're having a great day. So I actually recently got the opportunity to play on the ArcheAge Unchained media test server, and this was a really cool opportunity because I had never tried ArcheAge before, and I had heard of the original release and kind of the mess afterwards, so this was on my radar for sure. But what was most cool is I'm very rarely, if ever, invited to things as a YouTuber, so it was kind of a cool step that way. So I don't know, kind of cool fuzzy feelings that way, which was fun. For those of you who are new, or not new, for those of you who are regulars at the channel, don't worry, we've got our regular scheduled Final Fantasy XIV content and other game content coming out as well. But this was a really cool opportunity to do something new, and as an MMO player, I always like trying out new things and being a part of the hype. I think that's what keeps it fresh for everyone. I definitely know a lot of people who enjoy following the hype trains, even if that doesn't mean you're actually gonna play the game. It's just fun to watch the videos and see what the world has to offer, right? So with that in mind, we're gonna dive into this. I'm gonna have some gameplay. You're gonna see me go through some of the races, some of the classes, and then get into the actual game itself. And as I mentioned briefly, this is from a perspective of someone who's never played ArcheAge before. And I have heard about it. It released several years ago now, and it offered, like from what I understand, it offered a tremendous amount of features that people were quite interested in. It had a diverse class system that allowed you to kind of mix and match what you'd play. It had naval combat. It had open world PvP. It had an interesting economy system. It had gliding. It had a lot of new features that MMOs didn't really have at the time, and a lot of features that current MMOs still don't offer. So it definitely has a lot of interesting things to play. The main thing that went wrong for it is that it went pay to win, and unfortunately, that's how a lot of MMOs end up dying, is they fly a little too close to the greedy sun and they get burnt. And in this case, I think it was pretty clear when ArcheAge went over the line, and there was a pretty steep population drop off where after several months, all you would hear on the MMO subreddit or wherever you get your salty news was that the game was perfect, except it was pay to win, so you couldn't play it. And that's kind of the state the reviews have been in for it for quite a while, is that if it wasn't for the pay to win, a lot of people would still be playing the game. So really cool. Really sad, but cool, because in the essence, and this is what the new publisher has done, if you took the existing game and you just said, hey, let's take away this pay-to-win nonsense, you would have a pretty good game to go. So that is the whole plan with the ArcheAge Unchained re-release, is that we have a good MMO that's now not pay-to-win, and that's the promise. Now, they've actually used the term pay-to-win in the advertising campaign. Like, they've specifically talked about the problem, which a lot of games kind of dance around. And the fact that they're tackling it so directly means one of two things. Either they're very serious, they're going to keep their promise, and it's going to not be pay to win whatsoever, or if it does go to pay to win and people are like, hey, your advertising legit talked about this, there's going to be even a bigger fire. So we'll see which way it goes. I mean, if you're an optimist, you have one belief. If you're cynical, which most MMO players are, you kind of have the other view on things. But either way, there's a lot of hype surrounding this re-release because the game a lot of people loved, and I've never played it, so this is a pretty interesting gameplay session for myself. And I sat down on Sunday and I dove into the game, and it was really fun just to discover what I'd been missing. So when we look at the races, and they're fairly traditional races. I mean, you have humans, you have humans, you have dwarfs, you have elves, you have some more mixed beasts. You kind of have a cat human that reminds me of Elder Scrolls Online. So you have a fair bit of options that way. The races do have different racial abilities, with the most unique part being two of the races actually having a transform ability. And I didn't go far enough in the game to get a good look at what this is, but you are able to preview it. And it's a pretty cool, like a pretty serious transformation. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays in with the rest of the character. And then you go to your classes as you do in many, many games, and you get to choose between 6 kind of starting classes. And it varies from like warrior to archer to sorcerer, like very, very traditional stuff. I took a look at the Swift Blade, which in my mind was the thief out of all of them. And I do believe it's one of the newer classes too, so I was kind of interested in it for both reasons. And it was a lot of fun. It was very interesting because not only did you get the daggers, but you also got a bow and arrow. And what was particularly interesting is that when I later went and made a sorcerer, I also got a bow and arrow. So it kind of seemed like the bow and arrow was almost a standard situation. I didn't try the archer yet to see if they just get like 2 bow and arrows or like if they get something else differently. But it was really interesting on the rogue to have the ability to use the bow as well. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because in addition to having the one class, once I leveled up enough, I also had the ability to choose a second class. And this is where I really got that kind of Rift vibe, where all of a sudden I'm like, hey, there's so many combinations I can start making. Because you can choose your second class, and then you can choose some of the abilities to work on from that class, and then some abilities to work on from the original class. You can really mix and match and make some pretty cool combinations. And it's really fun to have class design like that, because me anyways, I find myself just sitting around thinking about, oh, what if I did this? Or I could try this weird combination, right? So there's a lot of different things that you're able to do. Now, the issue with class design like this is that although it seems like on paper there's a ton of combinations, you're going to end up in a situation where there's a few meta specs. And if you're doing anything high-end, anything competitive, people are going to be expecting you to play those specs. And although you start at a point where there seems like there's tons and tons of class combinations, you often end up in a place where there's actually fewer meta classes than you would in a traditional MMO like WoW or something like that, where the developers are more easily able to balance one class and its entire kit versus having to think about how all these skills interact with different classes. I mean, from a developer standpoint, you can definitely see how much more difficult it would be to balance a system like this. But it is really cool to play with. And in the game itself, I eventually do end up doing the Swift Blade, and then I go to I think a witchcraft, I think is the second job I choose, which I don't know if I would do that as a serious choice, but I really wanted to see if you could just do any class together, because I'd never done it before. So I wanted to do 2 extremes, right? And I tried the witchcraft one, and then all of a sudden I had my Swift Blade with the daggers, and I had the ability to use this witchcraft like skill that brought an arm out of the earth to hold my enemies, and I could shoot them with my bow and then go and attack them with my daggers. It was a really interesting system, and it felt very cool to be able to do such a unique thing. Now, I don't know if it was the most optimal thing, and I ended up switching around some of my skills, but it already, like in the short period of time that I played, made me start thinking about what else I could create. Like if I wanted kind of to be more of a archer alongside my Swift Blade, I think that would be a cool combination. But yeah, like I say, there's probably going to be metas. There's probably going to be things that you have to do. But for a lot of open world grinding and like leveling and stuff like that, it offers you the ability to play in a different style. Now, as for the actual leveling itself, it was fairly traditional. You had a mix of different quests you could do. It was interesting that there were specifically racial quests, so I do like the aspect of there being kind of a story that continues with the different races. But it was a very traditional system. What I did notice though is that they did have kind of a voiceover of the actual tutorial system, which was really nice. It was kind of, instead of having to read through absolutely everything, and you do have the option to read through a lot of it, you could just listen to the in-game music, the in-game voiceover, and learn how to interact with a lot of the different systems. So that was something that you don't even get in a lot of the more AAA MMOs, which, I mean, this is kind of a AAA MMO anyways, but a lot of the bigger budget MMOs, you don't have that voiceover. And don't get me wrong, I guess it is kind of immersion breaking having a voice of someone explaining how to use the game, but it's nice. It feels good. The combat was really cool as well. It had kind of a mix of a targeted system, but you did have combos that you could use and felt very fluid and very actiony. I would kind of do one stab, two stab, and then like a charge through the enemy, and it would be really fun because you could line up that charge to go through multiple enemies. So you could really end up being quite efficient with your skills, or you could be quite non-efficient, and I would end up having my charge me off a cliff. So it did make you a little bit more engaged with the actual combat system. I had mentioned before that there was gliding in this game, and back when they released it, it was one of the first games to have the gliding system. It seems like gliding has become a really big part of a lot of games. I mean, for one, I've done Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 still has gliding as one of its core features, but gliding in this game feels really nice too because it feels very powerful. Like it's got quite the updraft. You kind of take off and then it's a slow descent. It's a different feeling still. And just the way the animations look and stuff like that, it's a very unique feeling, and it does feel really enjoyable. Now, I didn't get to max level, I didn't get very far, I didn't do too much, but the actual quests themselves tend to be at this level, the very traditional, kill a few monsters, loot a few things, come back to me, talk about it. There is obviously a bigger story going on. When you log in, you kind of see the cutscene of a woman who's portaling us to a new world. So it's going to have to do with uncovering the bigger mystery around things. And for people who've already played ArcheAge, I'm sure this part of things isn't that interesting. But I do think the game itself felt very nice. It looked really nice. It had a lot to offer. And, from a standpoint of someone who's not played it before, I'd say it's definitely worth trying out if you're someone who is interested or looking for a new game, right? If you're someone who's between titles, who's not really happy with what they're playing, this is something that's going to be hyped up this month. This is something that's going to have a bunch of new players. I'm a big fan and a big promoter of the idea of playing with a bunch of new players. I think MMOs are meant to be played when they're on the hype train, when there's excitement to it. Even if you don't stay, even if you buy the game, play it for a few months with all the initial hype, and you don't end up staying in the game for whatever reason, those few months of gameplay probably will be worth the cost of it. And I know when we play MMOs, we like to think of the idea of staying with a game forever. That's just how we view, our characters are ever living in the game, right? We play World of Warcraft and stuff like that because we like the idea of our character continuing and continuing and continuing. But at the end of the day, looking back at some other experiences, like when I played WildStar for the couple years or whatever, I paid for that game, I had an experience, and I think it was worth the experience I paid for. So I definitely think it's worth considering if you're someone who is looking for something new to try this month. Definitely give it a check out. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on ArcheAge Unchained, because I'm sure you are kind of in one or two camps. I'd love to hear if you think it's worth giving the game another try, if you're someone who had played it before, Or are you someone more like me who just didn't get involved with the first launch at all and just kind of watched from the sidelines as things went the way they did? And more importantly, do you think the developer will keep its promise? Do you think ArcheAge Unchained will remain non-pay to win? Is that just too optimistic for this world? But yeah, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next.